Hello, everybody. I'm just in the pre-taping version of the show here. For you that are coming in for the broadcast version, you have reached the right page for the show. Um, what I'm doing right now is just getting everything live on my website. So if you bear with me a moment or two here, it usually doesn't take more than a minute for me to get everything ready. So if you bear with me, sorry about that. That's just YouTube. By the way, if you're into doing these shows, YouTube is a wonderful way to do these shows. They make my life a lot easier. Give you a web broadcasting in a box basically, and you're watching me go through the final steps here that it takes to get my website live with this broadcast, which to me is just incredible. You know, I'm a broadcaster. So that part is now done, I believe. This is the back end of my website here, folks. I'm just updating my website, and that's the last stage of getting live here. Then we can start the show. I've already got my guest, Eric Coffin, on. Just making sure we are live here on my website so we can get started. There it is. So anybody that's tuning in now, just hit play and we're ready to go. So I'm going to get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Alan Barry Laboucan. I'm the founder of the Alan Barry Reports and the host of the show. One of my guests today is Eric Coffin. Eric runs the Hard Rock Advisory. Hard Rock Advisory has been around for a couple decades and is one of the most highly respected commentators on the junior space. And I'm also a fan of his ability to sort of talk our way from Wall Street to House Street. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me again, Al.
So I'm gonna, you know the routine, Eric. I'm gonna do the my shout out to website sponsors, and then we'll get started with the show. I've got a bunch of questions lined up for you.
Okay.
All right. So first of all, what you're looking at here that I'm seeing as well is my the page that I set up for these shows. On there, you'll notice that I include a link here to visit ceo.ca to talk to me about the show, or really anything you want to, any questions you have for me. I'm on ceo.ca a lot, and as well as Eric is, and it's a great place to come and talk about the market. So check out that link. My website sponsors include Nevada Exploration. They're a new sponsor. They're focused on gold in Nevada. They're using a unique exploration method to unlock Nevada's underexplored regions. Those regions have just as much potential, but have cover and make it difficult. They have a new method to try to answer that problem. Visit their website at nevadaexploration.com. Their stock symbol's NGE. They trade on the Venture Exchange. My next sponsor is Premier Gold Mines. PG is their symbol. They trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange. They're a gold-focused company with what I consider an enviable portfolio of projects from exploration through to mining in Ontario and Nevada. And now I have to update my website, Eric, because they've recently added a project in Mexico. So I'm going to ask you about that later. I'll give you a heads up there, Eric. You can visit their website at premiergoldmines.com. Serios Resources, SOI, is another sponsor. They're a gold-focused company drilling their high-grade gold project in Quebec called the Chichu Project, which is located next door to Goldcorp's Eleanor Gold Mine. They are drilling a 10,000-meter drill program right now, and recently had some other news. I'm going to talk to Eric about that as well. Serios is SIRIOS.com for their website. SOI is their symbol. West Red Lake Gold Mines is another sponsor. Their symbol's RLG. They're a gold-focused company. They're drilling the high-grade project in Red Lake called the Hinge Zone. Their partner on that is Gold Corp. Gold Corp owns 40%. West Red Lake owns 60%. And you can visit their website at westredlakegold.com to do your homework on them. Again, their symbol's RLG. Wolfden Resources is my final sponsor. They're a base metals focused company. They have a high-grade gold discovery of nickel and copper near Snow Lake, Manitoba. They've also recently spun off a project that gives them some exploration funds, and they're drilling another of their projects called Nickel Island. You can visit their website at wolfdenresources.com to do more homework. Eric, there you go. That's my sponsors. Instead of going into chatting about them right now, I wanted to instead talk about a couple of companies that you follow closely and also some trends. So why don't we start with the trends? What I'm gonna pull up is I've got a chart up there now, Eric, that is the gold chart.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make some observations here. It's been as what Mr. Gartman likes to call bottom left to a top right. I'm not a big fan of Mr. Gartman, but maybe that's one thing I do like when he talks about charts, and that's what we've had over the last year. I was getting pretty bullish back here after these August lows, and it started to look really solid until mid-October when Draghi came on and threw some water on our story there and put pressure on the euro and other currencies. The US dollar got strong. We got beaten up some more. Then gold started to bottom in December, hit a couple significant lows just above 1,000. Then made sort of a triple bottom, but the third bottom was significantly higher than the second bottom. I got really bullish at this point and started speculating that we were seeing a cup type formation on the trend, and it had anticipated a handle after that, and then more upside, which is what we've seen now, Eric. And I wanted to talk to you about, let's talk about that context first, and then maybe where we see things going in the future. You were one of the ones that was also getting fairly bullish, and you and I are not just don't just look at the charts. We also look at the fundamentals to get our bullishness. What was your feelings during these time frames, Eric?
Well, I expected the dollar to bottom when it did. I mean, I called the top on the dollar last December because I felt the U.S. economy was actually losing momentum, and I still actually feel that, notwithstanding payroll numbers, and we'll see another one tomorrow that everybody gets fixated on. There's any number of other economic measures that have been moderating really since the start of the year. I'm honestly concerned, although I seem to be in a fairly small camp still, that I think the odds are probably 50-50 the U.S. sees a recession in the next 2 or 3 quarters. And that in and of itself is obviously going to be difficult for the dollar. But I think the gold prices, to my mind, the main driver is a negative rate environment that's being created by central banks everywhere, really, in order to try to pump liquidity into their economic systems. That, to my mind, is a long-term trend. It's not something that's going to be easy to reverse. In fact, I really don't know what the end game is for the central banks, and I'm a bit discomforted by the fact that I'm pretty sure the central banks also don't know what the end game is. I think they haven't quite figured out how they're going to get themselves out of this now that they're in it, and that's been driving outside money, which is something I've been talking about for 6 months. Which is really, these aren't gold bugs. There's a lot of generalist money coming into the space, both in terms of bullion, the electronic gold market, if you want to call it that, GLD, and of course the stocks themselves. And the people are coming in based on this negative rate trend, and historically negative rates tend to be good for commodities and real assets, and they're particularly good for gold. I just don't think that's a trend that's going to reverse that quickly. So I've been getting less and less concerned about the odd downdraft we have because of, this central bank or that central bank or this economic statistic. One of the things that's been most impressive recently is how well gold has held up. I mean, there's been 2 or 3 things that should have been bigger negatives than they were. And I think you're just saying every time gold's dipped recently, you've seen really strong buying. It's just got all, basically it's got all the hallmarks of a real bull market that is a long way from over.
Eric, I always try to make things as simple as I can. And when it comes to chart reading, I kind of looking for certain patterns. And one of them that I like to see is, it's really basic, higher highs and higher lows and more green days than red days. Doesn't get much more complicated than that for me. And we've seen the kind of trend developing. Now, considering gold is pretty, usually pretty, I don't know if you can see my screen while I'm talking here, Eric, but the rest of the world can out there that's listening. What we're seeing is actually an extremely bullish and a trend that's got the start of a really long legs to it. Like you said, every major dip, it doesn't take long before the next, it pops off of that and the next higher low is created and a higher high and a higher low. And if you even go back to August, Eric, you can actually start to draw a line that is a pretty nice and consistent trend other than that little dip in December, January, and then it got back on track. But I contend that trend probably started back here in August, and with a little bit of undue weakness in December due to that the ending of that bull market you were talking about in the USD, and now back on trend again. That's those kind of trends tend to last a long time, Eric, because I would contend that the volatility on the down dips for gold is not that significant.
No, I mean, you really haven't seen much, by the way, a downside. I mean, I know it's been perplexing a lot of the technical analyst guys who spent most of the period from April to a couple of weeks ago warning about, there's got to be a big correction. People also got really hung up on the commitment of traders reports. And yes, I would agree that if you look at those reports, that market is one-sided, but that's the way it's going to be in a bull market. I mean, you have to keep in mind commercial traders are there. Someone who's trading for a commercial house, for a big miner, for a giant jewelry company, their job is not to speculate on the gold price. Their job is to maintain the profit margin for their company. And when gold's rising, that's generally going to mean they're going to go short. And there's a lot of people, including a lot of experienced commentators. I'm surprised to hear these guys over and over again saying, the commercial guys are always right. Well, no, they're not always right. They're always going to be on the opposite side of the market because that's their job.
Actually, they tend to. The last time around, Eric, they were right for a long time, and then they were brutally wrong for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I think people get hung up on it because they sort of go commercial smart money, but I think a lot of people misinterpret what people trading for the commercial houses are trying to do. They're trying to make sure their margins don't get squeezed, and if that means they go short in a rising trend, then they go short. It's not, people are viewing that as these guys are telling us what they think the market will do. No, that's not what their trades are about. Their trades are about protecting the margin of their employer. They're not about betting. They're not there to bet on the gold price. They'd probably get fired if they bet on the gold price.
Well, and Eric, I'm a country reporter, getting older these days and got a lot more grays in the face. And I always try to keep it simple. And, the biggest the biggest thing that I see for gold is that we keep seeing the weakness in the supply chain from the mines that are having head grades in significant decline, in the new discoveries that are, the discovery grades. Or remember when we were first in the business, Eric, talking about anything sub a few grams nobody wanted to hear about. Now we're seeing stocks getting revalued with a half a gram per ton gold and stuff like that's the new norm now. And so that's indicative of the weakness in the supply chain. And then you've got in India and China just a ferocious appetite for gold, no matter what the price is. If they keep on growing their economies, which is inevitable when you've got a couple billion people that have gone from where we were in North America maybe 50 years ago to coming into the modern world, it's inevitable that there's, even in the downtimes, there's going to be growth. That in a couple billion people economy is still substantial. 3 or 4% from a new base is still consuming a lot, and they're consuming more gold as they gain more strength. And I don't see those trends changing anytime, Eric. You follow all the discoveries, the pipeline. You see anything in the pipeline to get worried about it getting stronger?
There isn't very much, and I think, well, I hope actually might be a better phrase. I hope gold producers have kind of learned their lesson after getting their heads handed to them a couple of times in the last 15 years. I mean, I think most of the producers now, it's not so much about grade, although grade is king, but I think it's about margin. I think the days of guys spending $1 billion to build a million ounce a year producer that's got an IRR of 15%, like those days are over. And I don't think they're going to be back for a long time.
15% at a 5% discount rate.
I mean, that kind of stuff is. There's guys chasing that, but I don't see most of the miners building anything like that right now. They've all got too many recent painful experiences. So I think they're being fairly cautious. I think you will see more M&A. I mean, you may or may not know, I've had 7 companies come off my list in the last 6 or 7 months because of takeovers. And I can tell you the development pipeline isn't that large. I mean, there's not a lot of good development stocks out there right now. It's pretty few far between.
Well, Eric, the reason that I brought that up is I recently made a pretty significant change in direction in my reports. I had picked a group of gold stocks at the beginning of the year that had performed extremely well. And recently I dumped a bunch of them. And the reason that I dumped a bunch of them out of the coverage is because I wanted to make room for a new batch. And it's the new batch that I'm kind of wanted to, run up the flagpole with you, is the logic behind it more than the actual names. What my feeling is that we're well into a bull market for gold again. We saw I'm pointing out the strength in the gold trend. And so the key area that I see the most weakness, Eric, and the most improper funding and improper valuation is in the exploration space. So I'm going back to my roots, Eric, and I know you're an avid treasure hunter as well, an explorationist. And I'm starting to go and look again at down the food chain, if you will, at more exploration plays again. And I'm pretty excited about that change in what I'm doing. What do you think about that, Eric? You've, with your 6 or so that have recently gone through acquisitions or G&A type things, what are you looking at these days? Are you, do you see the logic in my thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of doing both. I mean, I've tried to find a couple of, I don't know if I call them development level yet, because they're not. In both cases, they're not deals where they finished defining resources. So at that level, they're still exploration stocks. I've tried to find a couple of those, simply like I said, because that part of my list has gotten pretty short, and I know some people that's what they want, but by and large, most of the new companies that I've started following the last few months are exploration stocks. I mean, that's That's
Is
kind of
that partially a function of valuation too, Eric? Are the ones that you're seeing in the development stage a little rich for you?
some of them. I mean, some of the ones I've looked at, there's some projects that I like. I think are good projects, but they're just not that cheap. Like, I don't see a large amount of upside in the immediate term. If I had some reason to think, there was a takeover imminent, I mean, okay, that's a different story. Then maybe I jump on that in the alert just as a one-shot deal. But I felt that once we got into the summer here, and I was one of the guys through this whole summer that kept saying there isn't going to be a pullback this summer. Like this.
Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to get to, Eric, is the seasonality, because you came on the show and we talked about the going away in May, and I did want to talk about that. So sorry for interrupting you. Yeah. I just wanted to put it in context that my audience heard you talk about that.
Yeah, because I just thought I didn't think this was going to be a year where we were going to see that. But once you started getting into the summer, you started seeing, thankfully, you started seeing exploration stocks. One, their prices started moving, but two, you started seeing more and more of these guys able to do $1, $2, $3, $4 million raises, which is what you need. I mean, we all know what the risks are with exploration stocks.
And setting their price in the public market and being able to hold on to that price without.
It's impressive how many stocks actually rose after announcing a financing, because after 5 years, we were so used to seeing stocks just get hammered the instant they announced a financing. And so you've got all these guys now that are cashed up again, and you have a market. There's no two ways about it. This market's definitely paying up for discoveries and for good exploration results. And even now, we still haven't seen, there haven't really been many new discoveries. I mean, we're still waiting to see whatever this cycle's big new discovery is.
We're seeing some hints that they might be out there. I think that one of the names is CXO. I know you cover that one. Yeah. They are giving me signs that they might be onto something pretty significant. And my sponsor, Serios, SOI, which is a company that you also follow, and from early in this move for the company. I don't know
what you've heard, by the way, but I've heard rumors from a couple of people that there's a bunch of visible gold rumors floating around. I don't know whether you noticed, but that thing Serios traded like crazy today. It closed at 78 or 79.
Yeah.
Shares.
I don't, Eric, I'm not sure if that's what I'm seeing in the market. I mean, what I'm sort of seeing is I think we're getting an updraft in the gold price. That's, people are looking at the menu of potential exploration projects in good jurisdictions beside big mines, and there just aren't a lot of those out there. And they've had a couple of significant news releases, I think, that also might justify a repricing. One was they announced a 10,000 meter drill program is underway. I think that's the most significant news. But then again, they seem to get a lot of optimism once they announce that they've got 100% of their project. So. Yeah, I mean, it's indicative of a rising market for gold, right, Eric? That these companies are getting repriced, and I think a lot. What's exciting to me, Eric, is that they seem to be a better filter for where the money's going to this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as broad as it was the last couple of cycles, but that's actually good.
Oh, hey, Eric, if part of the menu to get repriced includes the things that I said, having a great project in Quebec, one of the best jurisdictions in the world, right beside, the Eleanor mine that is one of Quebec's exciting new mines, and owned by Goldcorp, and right next door is Serios with an exciting drill program. Now, in the news release, they had a couple interesting things out, Eric. I'm going to pull that news release up on their website. Where is it? That's the one that they announced. Let's talk a little bit about the drilling. What I know that one of the key targets is hole 52, obviously. That's the one I'm most excited about. They've got drilling around there, and then they've got a wildcat area, and then they've got a contact between a couple of rock packages. What's the big picture for you on this company, Eric? That's what I'm most interested in. This short-term fluctuations in stock never gets me too excited.
I mean, they've rerun the model several times. The last iteration of it was these northeast trending structural zones, and when they laid all their holes out, it does appear like there's 2 or 3 parallel northeast trending zones, one of which is the one that hole 52 drilled. By and large, those were 2 or 3 meter zones, but the grades where you were in the zone were quite good. I mean, they're by and large, they were over 10 grams. That's certainly the kind of thing where you're going to add up. If you can add up some tonnage, I mean, that's going to work. I kind of like some of this wildcat stuff, but they haven't put a lot of data out on it. I know there's stuff to the north, farther to the northeast, outside in the meta sediments there, where they have some pretty strong soil anomalies. I don't know. I'm hoping to talk to Dominic tomorrow, but he's been out of the office, not surprisingly, with the exploration going on. I'm hoping to catch him tomorrow. He's on his way through Montreal. I wanted to get a sense of whether they're having much luck with this stripping program, because one of the tricky things with this property is that there's big areas of it where there's really no outcrop whatsoever.
Oh, is that what they're going to try to do on the package between the meta sediments and the tonalites, is to expose some of that at surface?
I think there's a couple of areas where, presumably based on drill holes, based on just how much overburden depth, they think they can get at some of this stuff, which would be, I think, would be quite helpful for them to be able to get a couple of decent sized exposures they can map, because there's not much outcrop on property. That's always been a tricky part. He's been doing a lot of the exploration history is really Dominic prospecting with a drill, really.
Well, they've got a couple exciting things here that I think sometimes I'm not sure the market really understands, the audience understands. One is that hole 52 is out in the meta sediments, and it's really kind of sitting out there all by itself. Yes, there has been some drilling done, but most of that drilling was shooting out towards the tonalite package. It wasn't really designed to test out here in the meta sediments too much. There has been 1, 2, 3 other holes that are out in the meta sediments. I'll have to look at those to see what kind of kicks they got. But 52 is what really got a lot of attention. And like I said, Eric, it's kind of sitting out there in the meta sediments all by itself without any real drilling around it. So that's one really exciting package to me. Most of this drilling that's been done, by the way, Eric, I'm pointing at their map, the plan view. Most of this is still trying to interpret the sampling. This is where things are getting exciting to me, is this package right in here between the contact of the meta sediments and the tonalites. I think what they'll end up doing, Eric, is trying to cut across that and get underneath there with their drilling. And up here is that wildcat area that you talked about, where they have a very large geochem anomaly, and as you can see, very sporadic drilling in that area. So yeah, I mean, these kind of targets don't come along very often, Eric, and being right beside, it's no wonder to me that as they've started a 10,000 meter drill program, obviously they're going to be able to attack all of these. And then the stripping you're talking about, where they can try to see some outcrop.
Well, and if they've got some success with the money they raised, I mean, they'll have no trouble obviously raising more.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a project, like a lot of stuff in northern Quebec and northern Ontario. If this 10,000 meters goes well, there's lots of areas of this property that are actually significantly easier, not warmer, mind you, but significantly easier to drill in the wintertime. Like, they've got some pretty interesting targets on the eastern side there, on the western side of the property there too, but I know that's really muskeggy over there. So yeah, I mean, it's theoretically, it's always possible to drill something if you're willing to put enough time, effort, and money into it. But ideally, some of this stuff is is better drilled in the winter. So if they make a real discovery and really get some momentum, I wouldn't be surprised to see him talking about another 20,000 meters. Maybe some of it squeezed into the fall, but once you freeze up there, you got another really long drill season.
Actually, it would be nice to see him put some money in the bank at these new valuations here. If the market.
Yeah, I mean, if he's not talking to brokers, he probably should be.
Oh, I imagine his phone is ringing off the hook.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's trading right now, I mean, there's obviously putting another 4 or 5 million in the bank would not be difficult.
Exactly. So take it at this valuation would be my advice. But the other company that I wanted to talk to you about, Eric, that's a sponsor is Premier Gold. They had some big news out, big for a couple of reasons. They are, first of all, they're a sponsor of mine, and I'm very happy to have them as a sponsor. They had, a few news releases out. We'll start with this one here. This is Premier Gold Mines signs definitive agreement to purchase the Mercedes mine from Yamana Gold. That caught a lot of people's attention. One, because it's in Mexico. Two, because let's face it, Premier Gold is, in the hopes of growing into a mid-tier. Now this takes them one step closer. It was a $122 million in cash deal, part in common shares, part in warrants. So then after that, they had news out yesterday of a very interesting financing package to purchase the mine. They've put together a $140 million package that includes some streaming, some cash, some stock. Very, everything that Ewan does, it doesn't cease to surprise me, Eric. And this one really came out of left field for me. I wasn't looking for, a new significant producer for them to add to their portfolio. But knowing Ewan is an explorationist through and through, and I'm going to have him on a show. Hopefully, I think it's Tuesday next week. I want to talk to him as well about the exploration potential. What do you think about this new acquisition from my sponsor, Premier?
To be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it yet. I've had a lot of other news to deal with. I never followed Yamana, so I don't know Mercedes that well. I need to go and see. Do you know what the mine life is on that?
I think I'm going off my memory, so please check it out for me. But my memory seems to be something in the 7 to 10 year range.
Okay.
And there's got to be exploration upside, or I couldn't see you in acquiring anything.
There's a lot of stuff in that region. That belt has. There's a bunch of smaller deposits in and around that belt that he's probably got his eye on, because my recollection is Mercedes has got a fair size milling operation, so he's probably got enough room in that mill to deal with a lot of feed from other areas. And he's not the kind of guy I'm not talking toll milling. I'm talking about them taking over other projects. He doesn't strike me as a toll milling type. It's a typical smart Ewan deal, I think. I mean, he knows how to get the market to give him the love, and he recognizes a bull market when he sees one, and it's pretty obvious Ewan's bound and determined to be a mid-size before this bull market's over. And I don't doubt his end game is to be either to be a large mining company or to have a large mining company deciding they need to own Premier, because there aren't that many avenues for the larger companies to get their hands on 300,000 or 400,000 ounces of production a year. I mean, there aren't many choices out there. Yeah, I mean,
this is 110,000 annual production from 2012 to 15 was 110,000 ounces annually of gold. They have looks like in the resource about 500,000 ounces of gold. So based on those, you're looking at a 5-year mine life, but it's got to have more upside than that. Inferred, you got another 250,000 ounces. So yeah, I mean, he's getting to that almost 200,000 ounces with this acquisition, and that is without turning on the project in Beardsmore, Geraldton area of Ontario, which is getting pretty darn close.
Yeah, I mean, we're still. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you next week, but we must be getting pretty close to the pre-fees on that one, aren't we? I mean, it's like any day now, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So let's talk, Eric. I want to talk to you about a company that you picked that's been doing very well these days. Is a company called SilverCrest, and SIL is their symbol, as you know, and my audience now knows. But Eric, I wanted to talk to you just so we can talk about another one of your good picks, because you have several of those. I think what's good for my audience to know is how you came about making this pick, because you were picking it last fall when nobody was really talking about anything to do with these kind of projects, and it's had some really significant success. So why don't you talk us through that process, because I think it's helpful for investors, Eric, to get inside your brain a little bit about how you come about finding these zombies that turn into successes.
Well, SilverCrest is the original, just to confuse everybody, we'll call it the old SilverCrest and the new SilverCrest. I followed the original SilverCrest for several years, and they made a discovery in eastern Sonora called Santa Elena, took it all the way through development to production. I know the guys, there's sort of three guys that started SilverCrest. Scott Drever, who is a director of the new company, Eric Fear, who's the CEO of the new company, and Barney Magnuson, who was the CFO of both companies. Those three guys founded the original SilverCrest. They got Santa Elena into production. I kept it on the list and kept it as a buy because it was a great mine. I mean, it was technically a silver mine, but it was actually quite gold rich, which is part of the reason why. And the grades were quite good. Eric is one of these guys. He's all about margin. He's not so much about size as he's about margin. And Santa Elena did a deal late last year. They were taken over, merged with First Majestic. At the time, I questioned those guys. I went in to see them after the merger announcement and said, okay, why now and why this? Their explanation was quite interesting and quite telling. And it tells you a lot about how smart management groups manage to not only survive but thrive through these cycles. And their explanation was pretty simple. They just said, look, we realize that we're a one mine company. We're always going to get a discount for that. We think our shareholders are better off if we merge into a multi-mine deal. And with that in mind, we went and looked at the whole silver sector, because a lot of our shareholders are silver bugs. They want to own a silver deal. And we felt First Majestic had the most leverage of any of the producers. They also are Mexico focused, and we know them. We know the management, like them, and all that. So they concluded a merger negotiation that saw the original SilverCrest being taken out at about 240, which was a big. Well, actually, no, it was 140. But keep in mind, when this merger was done, First Majestic was trading at $4. It's trading at 23 now. So all of those SilverCrest shareholders that were taken out at $1.30, assuming they just held onto their stock, they're effectively sitting on $10 SilverCrest stock now.
Wow.
Part of that deal, and it's important to understand this because it wasn't a one-sided deal. It wasn't First Majestic defining all the terms. Scott and Eric and Barney were quite adamant that the Las Chispas property, which they'd spent several years putting together, it was multiple owners, and there were a bunch of guys who hated each other, suing each other. It was a shit show. It took quite a long time to pull it together. Eric loved that project as an exploration target, and it was a deal breaker. They told the First Majestic guys, the only way we're doing this deal is if we get to spin this one project out into a secondary company. We'll keep some of the money, because SilverCrest was quite cashed out at the time. We'll keep some of the SilverCrest money, put it in the new SilverCrest. So when all of this came to pass, new SilverCrest started trading at 15 cents. It had about 20 cents a share in cash. I was pounding the table. I did everything but phone my subscribers' broker and put the order in for them. and believe me, if I could have, I would have. It was just like, it doesn't get any more no-brainer than this. These guys, and you're getting it for less than cash. Like this, like you got to own this thing. As it turns out, they've started early this year doing underground redevelopment. They had, the workings were old. They hadn't been accessed for a long time. They spent several months cleaning those out so they could get access and sample. They started drilling about 3 months ago, and they put out their first drill results the day before yesterday. I'm doing this from memory, but I think the average, they've only put out a set of holes from the central area in Las Chispas, and I believe the average intercept was about 2.5 meters, and the average grade was about 3 grams of gold and 450 grams of silver.
Yeah, I got it here.
Again, keep in mind, Eric is all about margin. Eric Fear, that is. You're going to see more holes from the William Tell vein, which is offset to this Las Chispas. It's right beside it. The same set of workings accesses both. The third place they'll drill is called Baba Canora, which is about 1 kilometer away, but it had worse road access and a lot more junk in the tunnels to be cleaned out. So it's kind of the last one they're getting to. Baba Canora was actually represented most of the historic production, which I believe was about the recorded production. Who knows what the total was, but the recorded production was about 125 million ounces of silver and 200,000 or 300,000 ounces of gold. The stock's gone from 15 cents to $3, so it's kind of a win, you could say. It's about a 20 bagger right now.
Wow.
I've obviously told readers, look, if this stock owes you anything, you're not paying attention. If you're not up at least 200 or 300%, don't ever whine at me. I don't want to hear it. But I've also said and I took my own advice, but what's left, I'm happy to just go along for the ride. Partially because I've seen these guys do this before. I can see how much of a believer Eric is in this project.
Yeah, but Eric, you gotta. I like that you're also sending some good advice to your subscribers there. That look, if you're up this much on this stock, you should be taking some profits, because let's face it, to go from $3 to $6 is 100% gain. We can go out there and look for other things now that you've got as that. Now keep maybe a core position, and you definitely want to take some profits when Mr. Market gives you 10x on your position. What I picked up here, Eric, is I went to their website and I've got on the screen now their vein here, that their William Tell you were talking about, and their Las Chispas main vein. Yeah. Can you see it there, Eric?
I can't see it, but I know what it looks like.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And anyways, I'm on their website looking through those results, and there you go. Some of their highlighted holes was 7.2 meters of 2.41 grams per ton gold to 311 grams per ton silver. Includes where are some of the big hits? 1 meter of 14 grams of gold and 1,900 grams of silver. A 1 meter intersection here, 18.55 grams per ton gold and 2,400 grams per ton silver. And it's really important what Eric was talking about there earlier when he talks about this is early stages of this new discovery. They're really just getting their handle on this thing, right, Eric?
Well, in this vein, I had a long conversation with Eric after they put these results out, and one thing he pointed out is he said this was always called a vein, and he said we'll probably call it a vein for simplicity's sake, but it's really sort of a stockwork breccia zone, and it actually sort of undulates. And he said you can see when you go through the workings, because they've opened up a couple of levels now where they can go up and down the drift for 500 or 600 meters. He said you can see this thing you can see the drift going in and out of this thing. And he said, I'm sure it must have driven the guys crazy back in the day, because before SilverCrest got there, it had never been drilled. And really all they had to go on was what they can see in the walls of the drift. And he said, I'm sure it must have been confusing as hell, because this main vein isn't actually that straight. He said, William Tell, the offset, he said, that one's kind of more like a classic vein where where the strike and the dip don't seem to be changing much. But he said this main vein, their working assumption was always that it's probably thicker than the 1.5 meter drifts. And so far they seem to be right, but they're starting to get a handle on these undulations and on cross structures that seem to widen it. And I think that's what you'll see them zero in on moving forward. They'll try to find a set of chutes where this thing's actually 4 or 5 or 6 meters wide. And if they can keep getting grades like this, you don't need a lot of tons of material like this to have something extraordinarily profitable. And that's, like I said, the SilverCrest guys, they're all about margin. They're not about, oh, look at us, we got 100 million ounces. It's going to be, look at us, we've got ounces with a 50% margin. That's what they're looking for.
It's really interesting here, Eric, that I'm going through their presentation, and I can see a couple interesting things. One on page 6 of 15, they've got a slide there, and it's pretty interesting. You see a couple of structures that are quite evident in the picture. One goes directly north-south, and that one is kind of offset, but the Las Chispas mine is just slightly off of that north trend structure. So is the Santa Elena mine, about the same distance from that structure. What's also interesting is there's another structure that comes down from Mercedes, the Mercedes mine, which is again just off of that structure. But that structure then bends and goes from north-south to sort of east-west, and it cuts right across the Las Chispas mine, and it looks like the Angel de Plata mine as well.
Right.
I haven't looked at their geophysics. Am I explaining something you've heard before here on this play, Eric?
Well, there's no doubt that it's structural, and Eric mentioned that there seem to be, because I see them in the drill holes, and the guys mining in the past may or may not have seen them. There's a couple of dikes that run through this that are undoubtedly related to those structures, maybe filled those structures. And he said that those dikes seem to be one of the controlling features. And he said you don't really see, you only sort of see the edge of one occasionally in the workings.
Which direction are those dikes? Do you remember?
They're more or less following the same direction as the workings, but they're sort of adjacent to the workings.
Okay.
They're parallel.
Okay.
But there's also a bunch of cross structures, and he said those cross structures seem to have created some widening. I know when they had the original SilverCrest, I remember once they were in production, Eric was following what he was calling I think he called it the 80. I think it was 80-20, the 80-20 model, and essentially what he meant by that was 80% of their exploration money was going to be spent within 20 kilometers of Santa Elena. And the reason for that was he was working on the assumption that if he could find even, a few 100,000 ounces of gold or a few million ounces of silver, there was high margin stuff that was truckable. The simplest route to growing it would be just find a bunch of satellite deposits. And I think that's part of what led them to Las Chispas. So once they started looking at it, he realized it's a camp. I mean, that thing has the potential to be extraordinarily large. And for a lot of, internal political reasons and family infighting, what have you, it really hasn't seen much attention for about 80 years now.
Wow.
It's never been drilled before they got there. They're the first, as far as they can tell, they're the first ones to ever drill it.
Put a drill on it. Wow. So they just...
something that produced a couple 100 million ounces. It's never been drilled.
They're on the page 11 of their 15-page presentation. Now, I think this was done before the drill hole, so there's some good stuff here, Eric. You can see the breccia package that they're talking about of rock here. It's about 1.9 meters wide where this chap's coming through the workings. 1.9 meters at 2.34 grams per ton gold and 343 grams per ton silver for a equivalent of 519 grams per ton silver. They should be able to make some money off of that, Eric.
Oh, I think so. And the Babacanora, which I haven't seen a lot of stuff on, it's apparently the thickest one. It's where most of the production came from. And it took them a long time to clean it out, partially because it's just a bigger adit. Apparently the main adit, and that one is like 2.5 or 3 meters wide and about 3 meters high. And now that they've got it cleaned out, I know they're getting quotes from underground drill companies, and that's kind of the plan is for them to they're trying to zero in on some of these shoots, and they'll just bring in guys with the underground drills and just do the 360 where they're drilling at basically every angle all the way around the drift and just try to whack a bunch of tons together and then decide what they want to do with them. I'm sure their friends at First Majestic, whose mill, of course, the Santa Elena mill, isn't that far away. I'm sure Keith would be happy to have a bunch of high grade feed if those guys feel like selling it to him.
Got it. Well, thanks for the update on that, Eric. I mean, the stock has done very well so far, but I always tell my audience, you keep an eye on these kind of things because you never know when there's dips or things get out of hand or they come back. This is a real project here. And, as far as gold and silver stories that are out there isn't a lot of really good exploration stories, but these guys definitely are seeing it in their in those drill holes that they reported and caught a lot of the market's attention on.
Yeah, no, it's a great project, and Eric's a mind builder. I mean, I've been friends with and followed Eric's companies for 15 years now, and this is a guy. There's lots of guys who talk about finding mines. This is a guy that finds mines. He finds mines, he builds them, he puts them in production. He's the real deal.
Perfect. Now, Eric, before we close off today, I wanted to go back to the seasonality that you talked about earlier. I've had a lot of success over the years by taking advantage of a couple times of the year to make picks. One is the latter part of December, and one is the summertime, August. Everybody sort of gets into got to do something before summer is over mode, and often a time where there's some weakness and you can find some opportunities. So these days I'm adding a lot of new names to my coverage. Is there any other names that you could give us that are, I am respectful of your situation with subscribers, of course?
Well, I'll mention the last couple of ones that I added that I'm hoping to have. Well, hopefully I'm going to have 2 or 3 or 4 new exploration names here in the next few weeks. Although I'm still doing due diligence on a bunch of things. But the most recent addition to the journal, it was added earlier in the alert service, is a company called GMV Minerals. This one's kind of interesting.
Eric, what's the symbol on that one? Sorry.
GMV.
GMV. Okay.
Now this is one that. Like I mentioned, how a little while back I was basically trying to find a few more development names because my list was getting kind of short after Gold Rock and Kaminak got taken out, and I found this one kind of in a backward sort of way. I was searching metallurgy releases actually, and I came across this project in Southeast Arizona.
Oh, yeah, I've heard this one too. It looks like a Mexican hat.
It does, and it's got extraordinarily good metallurgy, at least what they've done so far. That's kind of what got my attention. I went and looked at the project and pulled up the 43101. Right now, it stands at about 530,000 ounces, which isn't huge, obviously. It's 0.7 grams, and keep in mind that we're talking about an oxide heap leach project, and when you combine the grade that they have right now in the inferred resource with the recoveries, you end up with a recovered grade of about 0.6, which is actually quite good for a heap leach.
Oh, very good.
That's actually pretty far to the right side of the list, and that got my attention. Then I was kind of like, I guess I should find out who owns this thing, and I went and looked at the company, and I realized that the CEO of the company is actually a guy I've known for 20 years, Ian Clausen. Ian had a large and successful IR firm.
Oh, I know Ian Clausen. He was with that.
I'm sure you crossed paths with Ian.
He's really the guy. He had some project up in the Alaska.
Yeah, project up in Alaska. GMV started out with some stuff in BC. Then they went to Guyana, which he'll only talk about and describe as an extraordinarily painful experience. And when that was all said and done, he made the hard choices you got to make in a bear market, and ditched all the stuff in Guyana, rolled the stock back, and he came across this guy Manny Hernandez, who's the original claim owner at Mexican Hat. He's always owned the claims. They've been optioned to a couple of different companies, but they've always been Manny's. He did a very, in my mind, an extremely cheap deal. He got 100% of it at the bottom of bear market, and I think largely because Manny just liked Ian. He thought he was a good guy. Ian has subsequently been adding more claims and state leases around it to pull the property package together. GMV is actually the first company that's actually had the whole thing. Back in the day when most of the work was done by Placer and Santa Fe and a couple of others, they all had pieces of it. He's the first guy that has all of it. I've gone through the exploration plans. They're permitting a drill program right now. I think the odds of them getting this 500,000 ounce deposit to 700,000 or 800,000 ounces are actually pretty good. They are going to do some work in the flats, like as you can see when you look at the picture. I mean, you can see what's called Mexican Hat, pretty obvious. Everything off the hill. You're in the flats. Apparently, there's not much outcrop, even though it's flat. They said it's only 2 or 3 meters. So I'm hoping that they can find, MMI geophysics, something to see through it. They've done mag, and you can see repeats of the structures that are obviously related to Mexican Hat. And Mexican Hat's, it's extremely simple. It's just fracture filling that's been totally oxidized. It looks boring as hell, but the fact it's boring as hell and everything's on the fractures is probably the reason why the metallurgy is so good. And I started following it at 20 cents because I looked at it and said, you know what? I mean, even if this thing only gets to be 600,000 to 700,000 ounces, with this grade in this metallurgy, somebody's taking this thing out. Like it's not going to stick around. And they've done a couple of financings, and they've only got like 21 million shares out right now.
So that's a sub 10 million valuation.
Oh yeah, and I can see, like, you think in terms of what companies have been taken out for that have development level heap leach projects. I mean, the last 2 that came off of my list got taken out at about 140, 150 bucks an ounce. This thing's trading at about 15. The math was pretty obvious to me.
How's their cash position, Eric?
They've got about 1.25, but he could do more if he wanted to. The last financing they did was $700,000 at 20 cents, and believe me, I was one of the guys lobbying for more. I took as much as they'd let me take. They had a bunch of warrants outstanding. Most of those have now been exercised. That's brought in about another 600,000 or 700,000. That's more than enough to do they're doing a large column test right now. What the money they've got will cover that. It'll cover the drilling. It'll cover everything really till year end. I'd personally like to see them do another $2 or $3 million just to have $2 or $3 million, honestly. But the column tests they're doing now, I think the drilling is going to be the significant thing that really helps move them. But the column test, which I think is done end of next month, that could be quite significant because they did a very large crush size. Part of what got my attention with this project is it looks like it could be run of mine. And if you look at Kamenak, which of course, Coffin in a lot of ways was in a class of its own with the grade they had. But part of the big attraction of that thing was that it was run of mine, or could be run of mine. And if you've got a heap leach where you've only got to do one crusher, you don't have to do a crush at all. The economics start looking really, really good, and the capex really drops.
So now you're talking not just the high recovery, but your processing costs will be down as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at their most recent release, which was Tuesday, I think, it's just bottle rolls. When they put out bottle rolls, it was just part of the sampling program they did to get this 20-ton sample for the metallurgy guys. They broke out some other samples to do bottle rolls, and they did 3 bottle rolls. One of them was essentially some of the material that they dug up for this big bulk sample. Another one was a second rock type, and the third one was yet another rock type where there were some old drill core where they were able to basically take these smaller samples from 3 different depths, 3 different rock types. All of them delivered really, really good recoveries. One thing that came out of that, and I haven't actually talked to Dave Webb, the project guy yet. He was out of town, but I kind of stuck my neck out when I put the alert out, and I hope I don't look like an idiot on this later, but when you look at the table of their results, over on the right side of that table, you'll see the measured grade. And that measured grade is back calculated by what was actually covered in the bottle roll. And you compare that to the head grade, the assay grade. And in all cases, the measured grade is actually higher than the assay grade. This could just be fluke. I mean, I should point out that this could be a fluke. But one possible explanation for this is that this is one of these systems where standard assay techniques is underreporting a little bit. And if the actual grade of this thing is actually even 15 or 20% higher, like it just really puts the boots to the economics of the
What
whole
kind of drilling did they do, and what was the assaying method?
Most of the past drilling was done by all of the past drilling that's in the resource area, pretty much all of it came from placer. Almost all of that was RC and percussion.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to do some, and then I think the next phase will be RC as well, largely for budget reasons, but they've got to do some more core. They'll have to do core drilling anyway. The engineers are going to need that to do mine, pit wall planning and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that stuff was pretty much dry RC. Placer did most of their samples. They ran through doing leaches, so they actually have a pretty good handle on the recovery, because Placer did about 2,400 samples that way, and their average recovery was about 93%.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's really what got my attention on this thing initially. It wasn't the grade or the size or anything, it was the metallurgy. And then when I kind of looked at it and went, well, that size, those grades, if this metallurgy is real, this thing should work.
So if it's easily recoverable, could they also be losing some using RC and percussion drills?
That's the question that you start wondering when you see these bottle roll tests is the actual grade of this thing actually not 0.7 but 0.8 or 0.85 or something. And when you're dealing with something like this, I mean, going from 0.7 to 0.8 makes a massive difference in the economics.
Absolutely.
And I don't think there's any simple way. They're going to have to do a whole bunch of sampling and a whole bunch of testing to verify it. I mean, there's no simple way to look at this and go, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. They're going to have to design a sampling program to try to figure that out. But I mean, to me, that's all potential upside. There's no real downside to that.
It's a couple of things are catching my attention as I'm looking through this presentation, Eric, is that one of them is they've got a ground mag survey here, and just off of the one south, there's a magnetic fault there, and just off of that, there's you can see the Mexican Hat mine is clear as sticks out like a sore thumb. But there's an interesting set of right at the fault. There's another target that looks identical at the cross of where another fault comes down, and then there's another one a little further. What do they call that? When there's on one side a mag high and the other side's a mag low. Bipolar. Yeah. What's that called? A bipolar anomaly? Something like that.
I know their geologist, Dave Webb, is he got this mag relatively recently, I think, and he's actually very interested in trying to figure out, once you get away from the hill, if there really isn't much. Mexican Hat Hill, I mean, it got found because it outcropped, and you get out in the flats, there's really no outcrop, but he's definitely, during this next phase, I think you'll see him do some other geophysics. He wants to try 2 or 3 things out just to see, because I mean, he's got Mexican Hat itself, so he can try a bunch of stuff out and see whether, geophysical method X sees it or not. And anything that does, then he can go out in the flats. I think he was going to do some MMI as well to see if he could pick up gold in the flats, because he's looking at those. He's looking at the same thing you are, at those repeated faults in that mag, and saying, there's no particular reason why one of these other faults shouldn't have the same kind of zones on it as Mexican Hat.
Well, there's actually the one fault that goes sort of northwest to southeast, and then there's that's the one that the Mexican Hat is right beside, a mag low. Then there's another trend that goes right through the middle of the claim. It's straight north and south, and right at the contact of those 2 faults, there's another mag low that just sticks out like a sore thumb. and then you keep following that the south. They call it the South Magnetic Fault,
Right.
and it intersects again with another fault that they've got another that this is where this mag high and mag low type target is. So you can sort of see it in the geophysics.
Oh yeah, no, he's very interested in that. The other thing he's interested in, he'd like to do, and I'm hoping we see a couple even in this next drill phase. I mean, they've had warrant money coming in for the last month, so I mean, I think Ian's kind of keeps upping Dave's budget, so he's got more money to play with. But one thing he pointed out to me is he said when you look at Mexican Hat itself, you look at the zone, you know, he said really the host for this zone, he said it's not really a great host rock. He said the zones are there because you've got these. He said they're definitely structural. It's all fracture zones, but he said the host rock itself is like meh. It's not the kind of thing you'd go looking for as a geologist. He said just below where the actual deposit is, you're getting below the volcanics into these sediments. And he said the sediments in this area, they're essentially the same package of rocks that you see through a lot of the big gold trends in Nevada. And he's trying to figure out a way to target that through the volcanics, because he told me when he was down there last, when he was doing this large sample, Manny Hernandez, the property vendor, found him an old core shed that had one or two deep holes that I think it was Santa Fe drilled them. Back in the day, they drilled a deep enough hole to get down into the sediments. And he said, you know, I looked at this stuff, and he said it was totally altered and fractured and mineralized. He said it looked like great stuff. And he said the core was all half. So he said obviously somebody sampled it. He said I have no idea what the results are. Couldn't find any record. He didn't sample it himself because he's not. Manny thinks he knows where the collar is, but Dave said, you know, I can't confirm that, so it's not like I could actually use any of these numbers if I even got them out. But I think it really redoubled his.
So this is drilling
in some places.
This is drilling below that outcrops, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's actually below the volcanics that host the deposit. There's a sedimentary package it's the same. You know, he said these sediments are essentially identical to the ones that run through Nevada that are in the Carlin Trend and stuff. It's the same package of rock. So, but he said, you know, like all of this stuff, he said, I'm trying to figure out, you know, I said, obviously I don't want to just be rolling the dice and blindly drilling holes through 200 meters of volcanics. He says, I got to try to figure out some way to target this stuff. But he said, I'm definitely going to get some deeper holes into this thing to see. Well, and he said, even the structures that obviously host the gold in the deposit itself, he said, I would like to chase a couple of those structures down into the sediments below it. There are a couple of historical reports. I didn't go into it.
You know, it always peaks.
Well, there's some historical reports of some very high grade stuff in that area, and it was from, I don't know how to put this politely, it was from some fairly dodgy guys, and Dave was just afraid of it and said, I'm not even using any of that stuff in the resource calculation. Forget it. Like I can't use any of this unless I figure out a way to duplicate it. But he does know that that's sort of around there. There are reports of some very high grade, and apparently there's adits on the south side of that hill that, you know, they're all caved in and everything, but apparently those were chasing veins, and you don't see these veins in all the drill holes that were done for the resource. But he said again, you know, he said, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to try to pop some holes in to see whether this stuff's real or not.
Well, you know, I tell you, Eric, the geophysics tell them where to go, and you know, it always piques my interest when, you know, the rock guys kind of are saying, well, this is my menu of what I would like to see, and then you know, you go and look, and no, the structural story holds up, and the geophysical story holds up. This might get pretty exciting here.
Yeah, well, that's what I liked about it was when I looked at it, and it still is really quite cheap based on what we already know about, but it's got simple, I guess, straightforward exploration upside in the sense of just growing the zones, because most of the zones that make up the resource are still open. Just doing obvious step out drilling, maybe take it up to 700,000 ounces, but on top of that, I thought it had some sex appeal because there's a lot of target there. That's part of the reason why I'm, as a current shareholder of the company, and I'm not an insignificant one. I've bought a fair amount of it. I've told Ian, I said, like, I've got no problem with you doing a placement and get $2 or $3 million and hand it to Dave Webb and tell him to just have at it. Like, what the hell? Go do some wildcats, see if you get lucky. Why not?
Well, to me, Eric, these don't look like they're that big of wildcat holes, is what I'm getting at.
I think they're really good targets.
Yeah.
Like, why not? I mean,
certainly. It's in a good area. You can see it outcropping, and, it makes sense if you go deeper and look for something higher grade.
Well, and he's permitting. They're permitting the drilling now, and he tells me that this area, there's no, thank God, because there's a lot of areas where you do have this problem in the western U.S. He said there's no flora or fauna, there's no plant species or animal species where, there's no burrowing owls or any of that kind of stuff. There's the people at the state environment office are telling them, like, yeah, this isn't an area we've got any concerns about. Like, it's not going to be any problem permitting stuff here. So, I mean, it's got a lot going for it.
What was the other one you were going to tell us about? Sure. By the way, Eric, I'm going to be contacting Ian pretty quickly after our chat today.
I was going to mention it, and then I'll send you the coverage that I've done, because I was thinking when you mentioned you wanted to talk about a couple, I was thinking to myself, Alan's got to know Ian. They must have crossed paths someplace.
Yeah. No, Ian and the other guy, Alistair.
Yeah, Alistair and Dave Webb's been around. Dave Webb, actually, if you go in and do a meeting with Ian, it might bug Ian, but ask Dave about he's got this extraordinarily high grade discovery up in Nunavut that that's his. He's working on privately. Mm-hmm. That's really impressive. I don't know whether it's big, but it's really impressive. But see if you can sweet talk Dave Webb into telling you about it.
Yeah, you never know. Sometimes I could be an awful sweet guy there, Eric.
I know you can.
Well, that's what was there another one, Eric?
Yeah, the other one that I started following about, a month and a half ago, is a company that's been around for a long time, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to it before, to be honest, called Moneta Porcupine.
Oh, yeah. That's out back east along a really well-known mining area.
Yeah, they're just east of Timmins. They did what a lot of guys in Northern Ontario and Northern Quebec were doing.
What's their symbol again, Eric? Sorry?
Just ME.
ME.
2 letters. Yeah. They did what everybody else was doing in the wake of Cisco becoming such a thing. They said, well, what we got to do is drill for bulk tonnage. So that's what they did. They drilled probably 100,000 meters. They put out a resource in 2012, 4.3 million ounces at about a gram, give or take. And I'll be the first to admit that back in the day and even now, I can't say that got me wildly super excited. Mm-hmm. They put out a PEA that was okay, but clearly not okay enough that it was going to get financed, because you're talking about a sulfide deposit. So, I mean, the capex isn't tiny. The PEA, I have to say, actually looks way better at current prices, not just because the gold price is, I think, $100 higher, but more to the point, the Canadian dollar's 20 cents lower, which really helped the economics. But the guy running it, Ian Perez, he's basically taken the message of the market to heart. And from guys like you and me saying, well, yeah, it's great you have 4.3 million ounces, but do you have any grade? But what he's doing is that I think he's in the middle right now of doing a financing. What his plan is he's going to go back, and of course, this is a relatively cheap place to work because the infrastructure is great. I mean, it's like 30 kilometers from Timmins. Right on, it's called the Golden Highway for a reason. The highway is pretty much right there. He's going to drill the north half. They have a very large property package in this belt. I mean, not many guys do, but they do, and that's part of what got my attention. But I looked at it and I said to myself, I think the gold price is going to keep going up. This thing's probably going to get some price just based on this resource, even though I'm not going to pretend I love the resource to death as it is. But, the market will find it, because it interested me, because it was one of those ones that hadn't moved that much. I started talking about it about 24 cents. And But what got my attention and got my interest more was when I talked to Ian. He said, I'm just about to start doing a financing, and the plan is I'll do at least 10,000 meters. But he said, the plan is I'll probably just keep drilling once I start. The northern half of the property is a better host for high-grade, narrower structures than the southern half, where they've concentrated through all of their drilling. He's got a number of targets there where you got, much more sparsely drilled, but he got, say like 10 grams over a meter, 8 grams over a couple meters, 6 grams over 4 or 5 meters, and it's pretty spread out in a bunch of different target areas. He's going to go back to those areas and basically try to chase grade instead of chasing volume. And I think we're in a market where if he can tag on to something high grade and get a few holes into it, the market's going to give him some love for it. Plus,
Eric, as you're explaining this, something's popping into my head, and also about what you were saying earlier is that, I think the market is getting better at this asset allocation stuff, Eric. They're not just giving away money for anything, and they're looking at things a lot more smart instead of just bigger for the sake of getting bigger. Now they're starting to look for, margin, like you're saying.
Yeah, and if the market gods smile.
I mean, Eric, what's wrong with 24 meters of 3.9 grams per ton gold?
Well, he's got a couple of good. The thing with his main resource too is he hasn't updated the resource since, I think it was 2012. He's done 50,000 meters of drilling since then. Most of it was infill. I mean, he was trying to take it from inferred to indicated, but the northern side of that main resource area, I think his best hole there was like 115 meters at 2.5 grams, something like that. And that's not in the resource yet. Wow. So the resource will actually get a bit bigger. I mean, he said most of the drilling is infill. So he said, most of it's not going to make it bigger, but he said there's a couple of areas where, he said if I redid it now, it would be, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, whatever. It's not tiny. And there is a class, we both know there is a group of traders out there, some of them big, that are all about ounces. And if gold goes to 14, 15, 1,600 bucks, companies that have 4 or 5 million ounces are going to get bid up, whether their ounces are good or not. But to me, that was really just the underpinning of the story. The interesting part was him deciding to go back and look for grade. That's kind of what got my attention.
I see Patricia Sheehan's on the board of directors. She's been around, real sharp lady. I have a lot of good things to say about Patricia.
Well, the other guy too, he's not a mining guy, but Mark Wayne. I've got a lot of good things to say about Mark, because Mark founded. The current company is Regulus, but Regulus' predecessor company that made a large discovery in South America was taken out by First Quantum. He was one of the founders, along with John Block, of that company, and I think he's still a director of Regulus. So I mean, the guy's been around some really successful stories. He's apparently, I don't know much about his oil and gas side, but he's apparently quite successful on the oil and gas side too.
So 208 million shares out on this baby, fully diluted 224. So what's their valuation right now?
Right now it's about 95.
95 mil.
Yeah,
but
I didn't love the share structure, and I was fairly upfront with Ian about that, and he agreed. But when he took over it was 2009, 2010, the company already had about 120 million shares out. To give the guy his due, he's done a very good job of financing near the top. There isn't, notwithstanding the amount of stock out, there hasn't been a huge amount of sheet paper done. I did like the fact that Ian and his wife, and they bought it in the market, and they bought it in placement. It wasn't like free stock. They've accumulated a substantial amount of stock themselves. I think the two of them probably own 6 or 7 million shares each, and then they paid for that out of their own pocket. I like that too. I mean, I like it when a guy's got that much skin in the game that he's not going to walk away from it.
Well, Eric, my thing is, I don't mind if they have a couple 100 million shares out, but you better not be looking at something small if you do. You better be looking at something large and, easy infrastructure, that sort of stuff. So I want to do a little more homework on this one. I think it's a good one. It's on a well-known geological region there. They've got a resource now. they got the potential to grow it. I can see that in the geophysics that they're presenting there, and in the geology. They got some really nice big targets. So that all makes sense to me.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I'll send you the issues that the last two issues. One of them's got 6 or 7 pages on GMV. The other one's got 6 or 7 pages on Moneta. And they're both. And Ian's a good guy. I mean, he's a finance side guy. He's just bringing in the technical guys now. But I'm expecting a placement announcement like any minute, pretty much. I think he's pretty much got one lined up, $4 or $5 million, and that's all going to go into the nice thing with the Timmins area is I think his drill cost is actually pretty modest, because the guys, it's probably a driller who's based in Timmins. They live in Timmins. There's no accommodation costs, none of that stuff. Not a
lot of mob costs there. Now that brings up another important point about a company like that, Eric, is that they get a lot of bang for their exploration bucks. So they won't have to go back to the market as often, which, if they can get into a good cycle here for a while, they can overcome that stock issuance by, good timing on some financings when the market gives them, better valuation, stuff like that.
Well, he told me if he does $4 million, which is 5% increase on the float, give or take, he said I can easily do a 16 to 20,000 meter drill program with that. And he said that's everything. That's not just drilling. That's drilling, assays, geologists, everything, front to back. And he said that's because of where it is, because it's so close to Timmins. But he's got basically no infrastructure costs whatsoever.
So that goes again. That's a really important point regarding company that has a couple 100 million shares out. If they can get good results in this good market, sharp management that gets the financing at better valuations along the way, there's nothing that's not too big of a concern, especially because it looks like they've got a lot of targets there, Eric.
And he's got with whatever however much you do or don't love the current resource, the simple truth is if you're a company that's got a 4.5 million ounce resource in a rising gold market,
there are people who will pay for it.
Radar. Oh yeah, well you're in somebody's radar. And he told me, I mean it's not a big secret, so I can tell people that I know First what's their names, the First Mining Finance. I know those guys are approached him 3 or 4 times. He said no, and I don't imagine he told me there's a couple of majors that are probably on the property right now, and he said, whether anything happens, I don't know, but he said when you've got this many ounces, a lot of guys pay attention, like they just do.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Eric, before we close off, I'd be remiss not to ask a question from one of our friends on CEO.ca. He was asking me about Osisko. He wanted me to ask you about projects around Osisko's Windfall project, BTR, BFD, KNX. Are you following that story and what's evolving there, Eric?
I haven't followed it that close, to be honest. My main information on BTR probably comes from Gwen, quite honestly, who follows it. I read her updates, but it's a nice high grade camp. I like high grade. A bunch of these guys, I think they just need to show they can connect the dots on a couple of these things and create individual zones big enough to be mineable. I mean, Windfall itself looks like it's going to work. I mean, it's got great grade, obviously. So, but I can't say that I follow any of the surrounding companies close enough to have any kind of a strong opinion, to be honest.
Well, neither did I, but the chap that asked this question, our friend Dirk, he's a pretty sharp dude. So I'm going to do some homework on those, Eric, and maybe we can circle back on CEO.ca and see if we find anything else that we like about those.
Well, because I know Gwen follows Montera, that much I know she's following that one for sure, and she's probably got some good opinions on it too.
Well, I better wrestle her into a show again soon as well.
Yeah. You
got anything you're plugging these days, Eric? Any conferences or anything you've got coming up?
My next conference, and this is really embarrassing because I know I'm going to get the date wrong, and then Nicola will kill me. The next subscriber summit is coming up in October. Oh crap! I think it's
I'm laughing at you,
I
Eric.
think it's October 9th. And then the next Metal Investors Forum is the 12th of November. I'm planning to go down to Brian's show in New Orleans too, end of October. But I will, anybody that's on my free list, which and you can just add yourself on the main homepage at hraadvisory.com. You will get an invite that has the correct date on it.
I'm laughing at you, Eric, for a couple of reasons.
I know I should know. Nicole's going to kill me if she hears this.
That's why I'm laughing, is because it really shows who runs things at certain companies.
Oh, yeah.
Eric's name is all over this website and everything, but I got a sneaky suspicion Nicola runs a lot more than Eric does.
I'd be totally screwed if Nicole ever disappeared.
So I've got your website up there, and people can sign up there, and they'll find out all the dates. And I wanted to get that plug out there, Eric. So I guess that's a good wrap for today, Eric. Thanks again for showing up and talking about stocks in the markets with us.
Yeah, always fun to talk to you, Alan.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap things up then, Eric. And as always, before I close things off, I like to indicate that this show is for information purposes only. It's important for you to do your homework before making any investment decisions. I want to thank my guest, Eric Coffin. Thanks again, Eric. We'll do it again soon.
Okay.
Also,
Thanks, Alan.
No problem. I also want to thank my website sponsors, Nevada Exploration, Premier Gold Mines, Serious Resources, West Red Lake Gold Mines, and Wolfton Resources for, making my work possible and enabling me to bring these shows to my audience and to you, my audience. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.